As often happens to me when I sit down to write a sermon, I think about an idea, and it's easy to pick an idea that's way too big for a sermon, is what I feel like today. So I say this just to get this out of the way, because I could say a million different things about creativity, right? And I'm going to try to say one well, which is something I've been talking to a lot in our shared pulpit class as I work with some of our members to help them develop their own sermons, some of which you'll hear this summer. One of the great tragedies in preaching is to try to give 4 sermons in the time you have for one, because it doesn't go well, right? You'd give 4 very poor sermons that are each 3 minutes long. But I wanted to share a couple ideas that have been floating around in my head just to kind of get them out of the way first. One of them is working with the shared pulpit class. It's been really great, and it reminded me that creativity, for many of us, for most of us, maybe not for Picasso, who can just find something instantly, maybe not for Mozart, who can sit down and write a symphony, but for most of us, creativity is an iterative process. That is, you don't start with something very good usually. You start with something really mediocre that has a nugget or two that might be good one day, which is why I resonate with our story for all ages today, of sitting with an idea for a long time, not ready for it to be out in the public, in the world, until perhaps one day, with work and time, it is. I was also thinking about creativity yesterday at the DC Pride Parade. My wife and our older kids were marching in it. I was with our youngest watching it because we thought that would go better, and it did. Unfortunately, they were at like the very end of the line to march, so 3 hours later, they still hadn't started. And so they kind of had to leave. We all had to leave. But John and I saw quite a bit of the parade, and you want to talk about creativity, that is the place to go. In art, in music, in dancing, and clothing choices, of course. Just a really amazing thing. Okay, those are some ideas bouncing in my head about creativity. Here's the sermon, though. This was years ago. I was standing in the middle of Rothko Chapel, which is located in this lovely residential neighborhood in Houston, Texas, where I spent many formative years. The chapel is part of the Menil Art Collection, which is a large and really incredible collection of art amassed by a woman named Dominique de Demille. She collected art in the middle part of the last century, mostly from Europe, some from America, some from other places. Her family had a significant amount of oil money, like a lot. And the collection makes that pretty obvious, that they had a lot of money. Anyway, the Rothko Chapel is its own building. It's not in the sort of main collection buildings. It is octagonal, that is 8-sided, and it's sort of a tall, large, empty space. There's not much in it, except that it features 14 original works by the artist Mark Rothko. And these are massive works. They fill up a full wall, like the wall behind me, each of them. Just massive rectangles of canvas. And at first, they don't appear to be very much. They look like they're just black rectangles of canvas. But as you get closer, as your eyes get used to the sort of muted lighting, they just have layers and layers and layers. There are browns and blues and grays, and they're really powerful. And just the sheer size of it really sort of overwhelms you as you sit there. And I talked about this a little last week, but I'm talking about it again. Part of the experience I had there was the experience of thinking nothing. And I say that because my mind is always racing, always thinking of it, always, a song going on in it, a thought about what I have to do later, rehearsing a conversation I'm not looking forward to, that sort of thing. So to have a mind that is not obsessively thinking something, at least for this one moment, but just being, was unusual for me. And I say this again, not just the not thinking, but what goes with that, which is experiencing, just being. Now, I know that the scientifically inclined among us might chime in and say that we're always thinking, at least on a subconscious level. At the very least, our bodies are maintained by electrical signals from our brain. So if you are breathing, if your heart is beating, you are thinking in some sort of way. But mostly I'm talking about those moments when we feel our mind clear, when ordinary thoughts and worries and preoccupations go away, at least for a moment. And this has happened to me about 4 times in my life, that a piece of art has really just stopped me dead in my tracks and made me both speechless and curious and awed and just stopped. These experiences with art were that powerful to just stop me. The massive works of Rothko, you can't experience them in pictures in the same way. So if you have a chance to go to Houston at some point, I recommend going and seeing them in person. There's also wonderful other art in the Menil collection. There's a Warhol, actually there's a number of Warhols, but one of them that I want to talk about is from his famous series of large paintings of Campbell's soup cans. Now, he was saying something about taking a piece of what we consider pop culture and thinking of it as fine art, or transforming it. I don't know, it's complicated. This painting of a soup can had a really interesting detail that stopped me. Because the price tag, which was that old kind that printed in sort of purpley ink and were attached with some sort of adhesive, the purple ink had a smudge. And I sat there for probably 30 minutes thinking, was the smudge on the tag on the can and he copied it? Or was the smudge part of the painting only? Or I think it must have been a smudge on the actual tag that he was then reproducing, probably. But I really thought about that for like probably 30 minutes looking at this painting. Another time that I got stopped like this was at the museum in Chicago. It was a medieval work. An artist painted it turns out there's 9 of them total, but a series of panels of the life of John the Baptist. That museum only has some of them, not all 9. One of them showed him in prison just about to be executed. If you didn't know he got executed, now you know. It's difficult work being a religious leader sometimes. And so that was one panel. And the next panel showed him, by the way, he was beheaded too, with his head cut off on the ground, still bleeding. And I say this not to gross you out, but because I also stopped there and I was thinking about this. How did the artist select those 2 moments? You know, why not the moment of the execution itself instead of before and after? I think that's a really interesting artistic choice. And so I wonder if these sort of moments have happened for you. Or maybe not in art, maybe it's in nature. Or the moment when you read about Marie Curie's work in science. Or looked at a microscopic surface through an electron microscope for the first time. There are moments of pause and wonder, and I think they're inextricably related to the moment of creation, too. What were artists and scientists and innovators and inventors thinking as they did that work? I love Kessler's point that we heard earlier. The more brilliant the creative idea, the more obvious it seems in retrospect. I think this about forks from time to time. There was a time in human history when forks did not exist. And now, I mean, I don't suppose you have to use a fork, but most people I know do fairly often. And I just think that's so interesting. And we could say that about the wheel or about, shelters, about all sorts of things. I like the fork, though. So you probably know the famous statue of David by Michelangelo. You've probably at least seen a picture of it. Maybe you've been lucky enough, I have, to have seen it in person at the Academy in Florence in Italy. It was more than 2 decades ago for me now. I liked not just seeing it in person, which is amazing. It's gigantic. It's very, very tall. But learning a little bit about how it came to be. Because it almost never happened. there was an unusually large and nearly flawless piece of marble that got out of a quarry somewhere near Florence. And two different sculptors had started work on this piece, both interrupted for various reasons. And then that piece of just rock sat there for 25 years. This gigantic piece of extremely valuable marble, until young Michelangelo, who was 26 years old, by the way, convinced the city leaders to let him do something with it. And standing in front of it, I find it hard to imagine that this statue could have been anything else. Michelangelo famously also was one of those artists who said that he didn't sculpt so much as he revealed what was inside. I'm not sure I really believe that, but good for him, I suppose. There was this block of marble, this huge many-ton block of marble, and inside it was that statue waiting to be revealed. And one of the things I think about as I look at it is, of course, in marble, you don't get a second chance, right? If you take a piece off, that piece is gone. It's not like clay or bronze even, or a canvas with paint. So, as the writer and thinker Arthur Koestler points out in our reading from earlier, it takes both the work to make that creative happen and the aha moment to allow it to be. So I think about what's being created in our minds, what the world is ripening for right now that we might be able to help provide. And what is stopping us? What is not stopping us from doing things, that is, but what is making you stop and take notice? What is calling you to be a creative force? What problem or challenge or crisis is there for you and for us and for all of us to be a part of a solution to? I think about work with climate justice. I think about work with racial justice. I think about, in this Pride Month, our work for rights for all people of diverse sexual and gender identities. I think about other ways that we can make a difference in our local community for people in need. Part of that we do every day, and we'll do in a few moments with every Sunday, in giving away part of our collection to local worthy partner organizations. We think about how we can best use our resources to make good in the world happen. And of course, it'll take our perspiration and our inspiration to make headway on any of these tasks, as we all well know. It will take more than a few creative moments in which to break through to new thinking. And it takes courage and commitment to follow through on those great ideas we have. Because it's one thing to see the David within that block of marble. It's another to remove the pieces that let him be. So for these and for so many other things in our lives, we need creativity. We need to push through the blocks in our way and find new ways and new connections. And to go back to what I said at the beginning, it's an iterative process. We're not going to start with the best ideas, the best solutions. We'll start with imperfect ones, and over time, perhaps we can make them more and more perfect. But together in this community, we can be a part of creating something special. Don't you want to be a part of that? May it be.